Hey, welcome to another video. This one's a little bit of a follow-up to the one I did recently. Someone requested that I show them how I do these spoonbill photos, which is a little different than the way I do the herons, just because of the color of the spoonbill versus the herons, and the way I do some of those sports images, which you can take a look at the other video on how I do those. As previously, I use Adobe Camera Raw, not Lightroom. I'm just more used to Adobe Camera Raw. I've been a Photoshop user for a long time, so I migrated to that rather than Lightroom. Nothing against Lightroom, just use Adobe Camera Raw. So the first thing I do is make a mask with the background, and sometimes it's hard around the feathers, as you'll see, and it actually came out pretty good. So there's not a whole lot of touch-up work that has to be done. So the first thing I do is I lower the exposure of the background so that the bird pops a little bit, and I increase the contrast. This is all pretty easy stuff if you're familiar with Lightroom or Adobe Camera Raw. I lower the highlights, lower the shadows. The whites, it depends, because of this, the water droplets here, you really want a little bit of those if you can get them. And reduce the blacks. And then I also reduce the texture, the clarity. Now this was shot on a Nikon Z8 with a Nikon 24-120 f4 lens. Shot at f4. I don't remember the focal length was 84 millimeter. Okay. Duh, I can just look. All right, and then I dehaze it a little bit. And then at that point, you're pretty much there already. Then the other thing I do is make another mask and select the subject. I usually take that off. And then I play with the exposure of the bird as well. And also the contrast, maybe increase the contrast a little bit. The highlights, it depends on, because you have this up here and its neck. You don't want to blow this out here or even a little bit in these wings. And so I reduce the shadows. Again, you can play with the whites, but you don't want to blow them out. And your blacks. And then I increase the texture and the clarity a little bit. And the dehaze, I bump maybe a little bit. And then the other thing I do is I create another mask at times, depending on where the bird is and whatnot. And on this particular image, I want to work on this area here. I might want to increase the exposure and the contrast there a little bit. Play with the shadows and the whites. Just to kind of try to accentuate it a little bit more. And then I create even another mask with a brush. Maybe a little bit slightly bigger brush. Go along here. Maybe out here. I increase the exposure a little bit, and the other thing I do is I change the temperature. See how it changes the blue a little bit? Adds a little bit more pinkish blue to the tips of the wings. Let me toggle that so you can see it. It's not a lot, just a faint, and maybe bump the clarity just a little bit on it, the texture. It just adds a little bit more color to the tips of those wings. All right, we're going to come back to Adobe Camera Raw. So we're going to open it up into Photoshop. Now you can open it up as an object or open it up however way you want. For this demonstration, I'm just opening it up as a file. Now I want to crop it And usually when it's a bird like that with the wings out, sometimes I do it in a square, and other times I kind of like the 16:9 format. And I mentioned previously, I typically like having a little bit more space on the side where the bird is heading or looking than behind it. It's typically how I'm going to do it. And I don't always put the eye right on the rule of thirds. It's just something to consider. And then you want to go up here, view, actual print size, so you can see what your final image is going to look like. It's easier to work with it that way as well. Then you can decide how much you want to take your clone tool, clean up stuff that's in the water if you want. Again, some people don't like doing it at all. Some people do it a lot. I don't know if there's a right way or a wrong way, just your way. And then usually by now, I want to go and save it. So now that it's saved, the other thing you can do is create an adjustment layer. And if you're not familiar with what a histogram looks like, that's a histogram. This side over here controls your whites. This controls the left side controls your blacks. And here's your midtones. You want your whites to at least be on the edge where you start to see that information there. So you want to bump it, see how it brightens it just a little bit. You want to at least be there on that edge at worst. And then play with your midtones and maybe compress it a little bit by darkening it down. I like to have a little bit of texture in the water. Then you want to go up here, layer, flatten image. Typically I save it again, but what you can do, one of the tricks you can do is either do save or save as, and you can get back to where you were. But I'm just going to save it for here. But you can do save as, and then if you didn't like the results, you can go back to your previous image. Then you can work on it a little bit. You can decide. Now up in here, you have highlights, shadows, and midtones. And then your exposure rate, I usually keep it pretty low to start with. Pick a brush that's the appropriate size. And you can start dodging and burning in the appropriate areas. I know that there's a keyboard function that allows you to change the size of your brushes rather than going up top, but I for whatever reason, I usually just go up top and do it. Not a good excuse, but so you dodge and burn until you're happy with what you have. And then the next step I do, I typically go back into Adobe Camera Raw, and I add a little vignetting, and that'll darken it down even more in the corners. Look, see how you can do one way or the other, but it will darken your corners. Some people don't like vignetting, some people do. Again, personal taste. Play with your dehaze. What you can do, you may or may not like this option. Pick a radial gradient. I don't know that I'm going to want it in this. But you can look and see. And what you can do is you can brighten that up a little bit from the direction of where you think the light was coming from. I know this was a little bit more of a side light than what I have it, but see, when you add and subtract the contrast, you get a little bit more texture in that water if that's what you want. You may not want it, but me, I prefer it a little bit. Mess with your texture, your clarity, pop that eye a little bit more. That's how I do it. I may go in and do a little touch up here and there and maybe brighten this up a little bit or darken this, whatever you want to do. But that's how I do it. So I thought I would show you. And if you learned anything, please like and subscribe. Even if you didn't learn anything, like and subscribe anyway. I need the subscribers. Oh, and the last thing you can do, this is sort of something that I do at times. You can check the auto tone. I usually don't like the results. Sometimes I do, but you can let Photoshop, usually they whack the color really bad. See, terrible. It's not the color I want at all. But you can check with them and check with what Adobe's trying to do to you. And the other thing that I do occasionally, let me save this first. The other thing that I do occasionally, you have to change this to 8-bit over here, otherwise it won't work. It won't allow you to filter. I go into filters, filter gallery, and watercolor down here in the bottom right hand corner. And you don't add a lot to start, just a tiny bit, but see how I don't like that at all. But what you do is you go up and you fade, and you only put on maybe 4% watercolor. Just adds a hair difference, and that's it. Thanks for watching. Take good care. Till next time, see you soon.